orchestration tutor Thomas Goss with the first segment in a series about score reading. Before we dive into the whole topic of how to read a score and why people read scores, why don't we just define what scores are, okay? In their essence, a score is a document which contains an artistic work, okay? Now, what's significant about it is it's a document that can be free from its creator. The great works of orchestral music are all written out in score form, and the composers who wrote them do not actually have to be standing over the conductor's shoulder telling him how to interpret it, which is a good thing since most of them are dead, right? So that's what is the importance of writing everything out in a score and telling everybody exactly what you want. Which brings us to our next particular definition of what a score is: a set of directions for the conductor and the musicians. The better that you notate it, the more clear your directions, the better performance you get. The third definition of what a score is the one that we're going to be most talking about in this series, and that is that it is a visual record of an auditory experience. What you see on the page is what you hear in your mind, or what you will hear on the recording when you listen along to it. The purpose of this series is to bring those two experiences very, very close together so that you can become like a conductor or a very, very experienced orchestral composer, and basically just look at the score, know what's on it, and have a pretty good picture of how it's going to sound. The importance of score reading for a young composer can't be underestimated. It's one of those things where we tend to look at people who can just read a score and see it in their head as being, sort of super composers. But the truth is that you yourself, the average watcher of these videos, probably went to school, and every morning you spent a lot of time reading the alphabet and then putting the alphabet together into words and then reading words all the time. So, you spent about 6 to 7 hours a day saturated in reading words, and then you would take books home, you would see things on television, all around you were just words of text. Now imagine if you had spent even just 2 or 3 hours a day as a child involved in reading very basic musical symbols, putting the symbols together, hearing music and seeing the musical score at the same time, and so on and so forth, until it just built up and built up and built up. That's the true definition of musical literacy for me, anyways. It's not just knowing all of the different great works of music, of Western music, say, also of world music, different ethnic cultures, the different instruments of the orchestra, the different instruments of classical music all around different cultures in the world, and then of course knowing all of the modern styles, pop, jazz, and stuff like that. That's what people usually think of as musical literacy. But I think that it goes even farther. Musical literacy in the case of the orchestral composer means actually, being able to read music. And not just being able to read music like you would sit down and play a piano score, but learning to absorb music as it happens in time, as you read it on the page, as you hear it, and eventually internalize it. Okay? That's what I consider to be musical literacy. And in order to do that, you basically have to do score reading a lot. You have to do it every day. That's one of the great things about that IMSLP website, which I've got the link over here in my sidebar. Downloading scores, public domain scores for free, reading them along with listening to the music that you might be able to hear on YouTube, say, if it's a pretty well-known classical work, or just checking it out from your library, or maybe buying the CD if you like the piece well enough and you want to hear a really great orchestra do it. I spend a significant portion of my week looking at scores and listening to music, and I don't really sit down and set a time for myself anymore because I'm a professional musician, so it just sort of happens to me over the course of taking care of my business for the day, or just, in my daily life. I'm just used to it. I don't really even think about it anymore. But let's say that you are just kind of starting to get your act together, starting to become more professional in your outlook as a musician, or let's say you are maybe an undergraduate or a graduate student in music yourself, you probably will have to start setting a time for yourself and really sitting down with a score, making sure that you do it every day. Maybe even try to set yourself a goal of hearing a new Beethoven symphony every day, or maybe studying one a week and listening to it several times over the course of the week till you really have it down. That's actually what I would recommend. There are a number of different ways that people read a score. Okay, a conductor will be reading a score because they'll be looking for entrances of instruments, parts that need support, say the overall rhythmic, dynamic, and thematic shape of the score. A conductor will be looking at a score and they will be adding lots of different little marks to it and little hieroglyphics just to make sure that they've got a reminder on the score. And you may see that if you get your score back from a conductor, that it's really been marked up a lot, and you should actually take that as a compliment, because sometimes conductors will go through your score and they won't even look at it at all. They'll just wave their stick at it and then they'll get on to the next piece. If a conductor has really marked your score up, it means that he cares about what he's doing and he really wanted to get it right. Now, just as important to this process, though you may not realize it yet, is the copyist and proofreader for your score. And they are going to be looking at your score in another way. Okay, they're going to be looking for errors. They're going to be looking for to make sure that you put cautionary accidentals. Another thing is to make sure that the rehearsal numbers are wisely placed. Typically, a concertmaster from a decent orchestra will be looking at the full score, and he'll be assigning bowings for the entire section sometimes, just to make sure that everybody's bow goes in the same direction. I know that sounds kind of really silly, like an aesthetic thing that is not that important, but it's actually incredibly important because of the whole concept of homogeneity of phrasing in the strings. Now, sometimes a more musically literate person who's involved with production is going to be reading your score, say like an opera director, a choreographer, a presenter, sometimes even a technical crew will be looking for cues in lighting, staging, entrances, narration, and so on. And of course, it's not uncommon for the composer himself to write instructions for the production crew in the score. Now, a composer has to think of all of these things, and you're going to have to think of what we talked about in a previous segment in my intro, texture, balance, and function. You're going to have to think about things like, how is the musical idea being realized collectively? What is the character of the part writer? What's the historical context of the work and the orchestral technique of that period? That's so important. So those are things that you have to think about when you are reading a score. How do you actually read a score if you've never done it before? What are some techniques for getting the most out of your score reading? Where do you even start? To find out the answers to this, check out the next segment in this series, Techniques.